All right, I am excited to launch this new Webisode series with our partners at the National Alliance for Drug-Endangered Children. I'm Dave Clausen, co-director of the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center, and tell you what, I'm excited to have Scott, Stacy, and Eric here with us today. And as we kick things off, I just want to invite you all to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, please.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Scott Henderson. I'm the Executive Director for National DEC. That's our short version of our name. One of the things that we wanted to share was the reason that a DEC framework is really important in having a major impact on changing the trajectory of children and families' lives. That framework provides a way for a multidisciplinary team to come together, form an alliance, and then that alliance creates structure and a framework for them to apply all the different work that they can apply in their local community. To share a little bit more about our mission statement and what our definition of DEC is, Eric and Stacy, do you want to continue on?
Hello, my name is Eric Nation. I'm the Director of Training and Development with the National Alliance for Drug-Endangered Children. And prior to coming to National DEC, I have a career in law enforcement where I've served 20 years. National DEC's mission is the National Alliance for Drug-Endangered Children teaches early identification, response, and appropriate intervention services to children and families affected by parental or caregiver substance misuse. We equip comprehensive multidisciplinary alliances, communities, organizations, and individuals with access to our National Resource Center, trainings, and technical assistance. And our vision is 100% healthy and safe children, families, and communities free from the negative impact of substance misuse and drug activity. Stacy, would you like to tell them the definition of drug-endangered child?
Sure. Hello, my name is Stacy Reed. I'm the Director of DEC Network Development for National DEC, and my background is 20 plus years in the child welfare field. So when we came together as a nonprofit years ago, we knew that we had to bring people together and have a common vision. So we define drug-endangered children as children who are at risk of suffering physical or emotional harm as a result of illegal drug use, possession, manufacturing, cultivation, or distribution. They may also be children whose caretaker's substance misuse interferes with the caretaker's ability to parent and provide a safe and nurturing environment.
Y'all are just truly driven, caring folks. I love what you're doing. I love your mission. I do. I wanted to kind of go back to that definition of a drug-endangered child. Yeah, in that, Stacey, you mentioned risk. Can we kind of unpack that a little bit? What are some of the risks that drug-endangered children might be facing?
So I think we should start out with kind of the definition of risk. And when we do training, we always let people know that it's the chance of something going wrong in the future. And when we talk about risk, we talk about children plus drugs equal risk. So any age child plus any type of drug or drug activity, whether it's use, possession, manufacturing, cultivation, or distribution, you have some type of risk, whether it be low, medium, high, it doesn't really matter. You have the chance of something going wrong in the future. So if I'm at a house and I know that there are children and let's say there's drug use, I know that there's some type of risk, meaning if I leave that house, there's a chance of something going wrong. So anytime we have children plus drugs and we have risk, we need to provide a response, and that response will look very different depending on what type of discipline you are. So we want people to be able to gather the information around the risk and then provide it to those disciplines who can use that risk. And Eric, maybe you can talk about some of the risks that we see when we're at houses, or some of the risks that people might see when they are involved with drug-endangered children.
Yes, absolutely. But I think it's also really important to understand kind of where risk comes from and understanding what discipline is the ones really assessing where that risk lies and if it's high, medium, or low. Because for the most part, it might not be our jobs as some professionals and some disciplines to really assess that risk, but more just to collect and identify that risk. So understanding that child welfare really is the discipline that is assessing if that risk is high or low. So moving forward, I think it's really important for us to understand the risk from their perspective. And we have a couple different categories that we look at. One is prenatal risks, and the other one is postnatal risk. And I have to tell you, as a law enforcement professional, I really did not think I could impact children prenatally. But what I've learned through the DEC mission is that identification of the mother or the father that is misusing or using substances, by just giving them a pamphlet to tell them that what you ingest into your body is going to affect the child, is one way to help prevent and maybe change the trajectory of that child's life. Stacy is much better around that than I am, the prenatal stuff and how it affects the children. Stacy, do you want to add to that? And then I can hit some of the postnatal as well.
Absolutely. So when we look at prenatal risk in regards to substance misuse, we're talking about both legal and illegal substances, because we know that whatever mom puts into her body can impact that child in utero while mom is pregnant, but also after the child is born. But if you think about it, those substances that are ingested during pregnancy can also impact that child throughout their entire life. So in each different drug or substance that mom ingests into her body during pregnancy has a different impact on the child. And I think it's really important for people to know that they don't have to know all the ins and outs of that. It's really hard. There's a lot of information. I think what people really have to understand is that we have an opportunity to identify these children and families at the earliest point when mom is pregnant or even before. And we have an opportunity to educate the families as well. Because oftentimes what we see is that they don't understand what they're doing can impact their child for a really long time. And it really is hard for families to understand at times what that risk is when they're using drugs.
So Dave, I'd like to go into a little bit on the postnatal side of things. And the postnatal is what most of us see commonly. And this goes for any discipline that has contact with children. So pre-DEC for me, when we looked at risk towards children, I have to tell you, it really wasn't a focus for us. When we were at a scene or something, whether it was dealing with a narcotics case or just any kind of criminal investigation, we were there for that specific investigation. But being able to identify some of the risks that these children are involved in around the Drug Endangered Children mission is going to be really beneficial. So one that we commonly missed from a law enforcement perspective was the chaotic environment. You go into these residences, whether you're on a narcotics case or you're just on a patrol call. Oftentimes these residences are very chaotic, lots of people in them, loud noises, people talking over each other. And when you're there, you understand that chaotic environment, even to you as a professional, is impacting your ability to think and kind of process what's going on. And if you really dive in and you think about that, most likely, if there's children there, the children are present during this as well. And that chaotic environment really impacts these children, not only just at home, but when they're sent to like school or other places where structure is expected out of them, because what they want to do is recreate that environment that they're used to, which is chaos. So understanding the importance when we talk about all these prenatal, but mostly postnatal risk, how they have to end up in our reports. No matter what discipline you are, we have to document it, whether it's through video, whether it's through pictures, but mostly through our narratives that we are writing. But chaotic environments is one that is commonly missed. I also would like to go into just the risk around like safety risk. So oftentimes we would be in residences and stuff and we would miss the obvious things that were there, like electrical outlets that weren't covered, wiring that wasn't to code. We would identify the obvious ones like drugs and paraphernalia that were in the residence. But the ones that we really missed were the ones that were not directly related to our cases. And by working with Stacy and other professionals across the board, it allowed me to get more of a broad perspective of the life of the child and what was impacting them. So starting to look at, what was on the floor, the lack of flooring, the risk just based around like what kind of food was available. Was it good food? Was it spoiled food? Was there something to drink? Was there not something to drink? Were the kids being supervised? We oftentimes see kids that are wandering around by themselves or left home alone. And recognizing that we had to make a report on those and talk to our child welfare professionals and document it so all disciplines could understand what these children were facing around risks. Stacy, there's some other risks that I'm sure I'm missing that maybe you can help provide.
So I think one of the ones that are coming to mind for me is the domestic violence and the violence in the home. So research shows us that there's a correlation between substance misuse in the home and violence in the home. So we really want people to be looking for both because we can't provide a service for both of them if they're not identified. So, and we want families to not come into our system over and over, so that revolving door. So we have to make sure that we're identifying all of the risks up front as much as possible.
That come to mind for me as well is like animal feces. I've been in numerous houses where animal feces was present, and I have to tell you, pre-DEC, we never identified or documented that because it wasn't part of that direct investigation that we were working. But animal feces, trip fall hazards. If you're in a 2-story house and the staircase is loaded with stuff and it's impossible to walk up and down, identifying that trip fall hazard is a risk to these children.
So I also think that each discipline that's involved with these children or have an opportunity to identify these children, identify different risks. So if you think about a teacher, they're going to identify risks that they see entering the school or leaving the school. They're not going to be in the home, so they're not going to identify those risks. But the risks that they identify are still going to be really important to provide services for the families and also to make children safe. Likewise, the medical professionals, the pediatricians, the emergency room doctors, those folks are going to have a different list of risks as well that they're seeing that maybe law enforcement and child welfare aren't going to see. And likewise, service providers, child welfare, law enforcement, people that are going to be in the residence, they're going to see things differently as well. We all have different training and background, so we're all going to look at things through a different lens. So if you think about just child welfare and law enforcement, child welfare is looking for abuse and neglect. Law enforcement is looking for crimes, criminal activity. Those are very different at times, but when you overlap them, it provides a bigger picture of what that child is going through. And so if we have all of the pieces to the puzzle, so if you have law enforcement information, if you have child welfare information, if you have the teacher's information, the medical information, and whoever else that can provide information for that child and that family, we have a bigger picture of what that child is experiencing, and therefore service providers can therefore address the concerns with more information.
So also keep in mind that when you're at a scene, you could both be standing, or multiple disciplines could be standing in one room, and we're all going to see things differently. We're all going to pick out different evidence, different information that is relevant to the child's life. Scott, do you have anything you would like to add as far as risk and how it impacts these kids and what we can do as professionals?
Well, I think what you guys are describing is a really great way of sharing what we teach and train for DEC alliances and that framework that we train. It's also a DEC approach that includes that early recognition, and it takes all eyes to see the different risks that the kids, and then recognize that they're at risk. Somebody who's in substance misuse, they may not perceive that they're putting their children and family at risk. So that early recognition and then appropriate intervention and response, not just for the children, but also for the folks that are in substance misuse. It's a whole family approach that really is meaningful. And then how we get those services are going to be specific to that situation, but that's really the framework for addressing the risk. So that early recognition, intervention and response, and then services to the children and family obviously are 3 keys in this whole approach. And that's why it takes a multidisciplinary alliance of folks. Plus, they're also communicating and sharing what their perceptions of risks are and what their policies and procedures are for dealing with those risks. And that shared conversation builds a common understanding and a common approach in a local community that can be really meaningful. And Eric and Stacey, you've worked in those arenas, in those local communities before. Do you want to give any specific examples about how you've seen that at work and where it really does work and is sustainable?
So I think Scott brings up some excellent points, and I appreciate that, Scott, because I think we have to take a different outlook or a different mindset when we switch to the DEC mission. And you kind of brought up some of the mission concepts. is we got to get away from that. This mission is no longer about one individual or one discipline's efforts. This is truly about the children, the families, and the communities. I think we're all frustrated at times with the multi-generational cycle of abuse and neglect and feeling like we're hopeless at times. But really, with what you just described, we can come at it, because I could tell you case by case pre-DEC when we were inside a residence and we identified the drugs, we identified the drug paraphernalia, we identified the drug notes, we identified all the things around the drug crime. The one thing that we always missed was the crime around the children. And even if you don't want to make it a criminal part, what was affecting the child's life? And knowing that these children didn't have a voice, and that in all actuality, we were supposed to be the voice for that child. And by collecting that information is one thing, but if you don't share it, it's no good. So you have to be willing to share it with your partners, whether it be child welfare, whether it be the mental health, behavioral health, the ongoing service providers. And that is where those tight relationships come in. And we learn that we can paint that picture of the child's life in hopes to change that trajectory. Because I guarantee you, no matter where we're at or how we're looking at it, Stacy and I, both from different professions, are going to look at it differently, but combined, our knowledge is power.
Biggest takeaway that I have from my career, both in investigations and then at the state level, was one of the most important things was that collaboration. I could look at my investigations where I had really good collaboration with law enforcement, the teachers, the service providers, the doctors, versus investigations where I didn't have good collaboration with those folks for whatever reason, whether I was too busy or they were too busy or I didn't know who they were. There's a difference. Those collaborative efforts were huge for those children and families in receiving services and whether I removed or not. So I think that collaborative effort just provides people with more context around the children and families, and then we can better serve them in a variety of different ways. When I was collaborative with the teachers, they were appreciative because then they at least knew at least a little bit of what was going on in that child's life, because they too are going to be a support for them in a lot of different ways where I can't be. And I think at the state level, in reviewing a lot of the investigations and cases for child welfare, that's one of the big things we saw. The lack of collaboration led to a lack of information, or at least less information, and the cases weren't as strong, the investigations weren't as strong. So seeing those collaborative efforts and what they could really do to bolster not only investigations and cases, but also the services and support to children and families is huge across the board.
David, I think a good way to sum this all up is we have to be able to identify risk from every discipline's perspective. Every discipline that comes to the table is going to have their own definition of what risk looks like. And we have to be open and willing as professionals to at least absorb the other discipline's outlook on what risk is and how it affects the children, and be able and willing to investigate, report, and to work and share that information. Because if I'm looking just for that one thing, and Stacy's looking for just that thing that she's looking for, and Scott's just looking for that, and Dave, you're looking for your own thing, we're really not collaborating to make a difference in the child's life. For me to gain the knowledge of what you are looking for from a different discipline, Stacy's looking for from a different discipline, and Scott's looking for from a different discipline, is going to make my investigative abilities better and stronger. And I really hope that people and professionals will start getting away from that status quo that, hey, this is my job, this is what I'm supposed to do, and really look at it from the perspective of we have the opportunity to impact and change the trajectory of a child's life, and ultimately the community and the family's lives as well.
That's really well said, Eric. Yeah, that's when we can get out of our silos and we can work together and be willing to recognize risk and call risk for what it is. That begs a response. And then when we respond together, like you said, that's what changes the lives of children's families and communities and breaks that cycle of substance misuse and abuse that can be perpetuated infinitely.
All just said is why we are such good, strong partners, because at the Mid-America PETTC, we believe prevention is better together, and together we are stronger. I want to just kind of close this episode out with one last question. We've talked a little bit about few of the disciplines that should be involved. law enforcement, child welfare, medical, and teachers. Who else should be at the table? Who else plays a role in changing the trajectory of a child's life?
I think there's a multiple ways of looking at this. I think there's an investigative side of things where people collaborate around like an investigative side, and that should include fire and EMS, um, probation, parole, behavioral health, mental health. But I also think that one thing that multidisciplinary teams lose sight of, and that is the community awareness. So outside of that investigative side, we should be including our community in this. So the water meter readers, the cable providers, the funeral homes, anybody that comes in contact with children to help identify them at the earlier stages. Stacy, do you have any others you would like to add?
I would just say that who shouldn't be involved. And I can't think of very many disciplines that shouldn't be involved, because I think we all have an opportunity to at least be able to identify the children. And that in and of itself may be the most important responsibility within the community. So there isn't a discipline I can think of that I wouldn't bring to the table. Now, we have seen a lot of disciplines where maybe, like Eric talked about, the cable company and those kinds of things that maybe we didn't think about. But I would really want people to think outside the box as to who you can educate to identify these children at the earliest point, and then who can help these children after they're identified.
Yeah, obviously teachers are a big component. Anybody who's in care, observation, or supervision, short-term or long-term, of children should definitely be involved.
All right, together is better. Man, y'all throwing a lot of great information at us, talking about what a definition of a drug endangered child is, a little bit about that multidisciplinary approach, a whole bunch of the risks that these children may be facing, and really just that importance of coming together to help identify and support these children and families.
Yeah, I'd like to point people out, if you don't mind, real quick,
Mhm.
to one of our one pagers that
Mhm.
describes risk and stuff like that, that is located on our website as well.
Absolutely. And if you look down below for this episode, you'll see a link directly to that one pager. And on that website, ton of great resources as well. So that's your homework, folks. Go check out the National Deck website and all the resources they have to offer. Thank you all for joining us.